Hi guys, welcome to the Hidden Motives crime series. Today we're going to take a closer look at another disturbing case, the case of Kristen Rossum. She could have become a scientist, but she chose a very different path. Blonde Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate from San Diego State University, once had a future full of promise. Instead, she's now serving a life sentence at the Central California Women's Facility for the murder of her husband. Ralph and Constance Rossum had 3 children and worked hard to give them every opportunity for success. The children attended top schools, received private tutoring, and took part in clubs and activities meant to develop their talents. Kristen, however, struggled under the pressure. Fragile and impulsive, she couldn't keep up with the pace or the expectations placed on her. She began lying, skipping classes, and looking for ways to escape. At first, alcohol gave her a sense of relief and temporary calm, but before long, it stopped working. That's when she became dependent on the controlled substance methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, often called meth, is one of the most addictive illegal drugs in the United States. It can cause paranoia, poor judgment, euphoria, and hallucinations. Kristen's behavior became erratic, and her growing detachment from reality didn't go unnoticed. Her parents became concerned. After a long and difficult conversation, she admitted she had been using meth since high school. For a family of university-educated professionals, this revelation was a devastating blow. After months of constant arguments and tension at home, 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away to Mexico with friends for a holiday. While there, she met a man by chance, tall, handsome Gregory de Villiers. 7 years older than her, he seemed like someone who could rescue her from the life she was spiraling into. And in many ways, he did. Greg fell in love with Kristen and took on a protective, almost parental role, assuming responsibility for her well-being. With Greg's support, Kristen managed to get a job at a local forensic department as a toxicology assistant. Her technical abilities impressed her employer. Her past addiction faded into the background, something that ultimately worked in her favor. Since her position in toxicology gave her access to seized controlled substances. As a forensic assistant, Kristen went on to graduate from university with honors. Her professors and supervisors praised her and awarded her Best Student honors, unaware of the deeper reasons behind her interest in the field. Kristen and Greg's relationship lasted about 5 years and ended with a large wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Greg and felt reassured about their daughter's future. In their eyes, she had pulled herself out of addiction and was finally standing on solid ground, moving toward a stable and happy life. In March 2000, Kristen was hired by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist. A toxicologist's job is to analyze body fluids to detect controlled substances. At the time, Gregory was working in the biotechnology industry. Before long, Kristen grew bored with what she saw as a routine, predictable life. She began looking for excitement elsewhere and found it through a new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had recently been appointed department head. He was married, but that didn't stop a sudden attraction from forming between them. They tried to keep their relationship hidden, but it didn't last long. Greg eventually discovered letters exchanged between the two. The marriage quickly began to unravel. Gregory still hoped to fix things. He understood his wife's weaknesses and did everything he could to help her again. This time, though, Kristen didn't want help. She wanted out. She demanded a divorce. On the morning of Monday, November 6, 2000, Kristen got ready for work as she normally did. Greg was sick and stayed home that day. Kristen was concerned about him. In the days after their conversation about separating, he had been unusually calm and lethargic. She contacted his workplace to explain his illness and later stopped by the apartment during her lunch break to check on him. That evening, at 9:22 p.m., Kristen called emergency services and reported that her husband, Greg, was not breathing. She suggested that he may have taken his own life while home alone. Crying on the phone, she ignored the dispatcher's instructions to examine his condition or attempt first aid. Police officers and paramedics arrived at the apartment at 10:19 p.m. and pronounced Gregory de Villiers dead. He was found on the bedroom floor, his torso exposed, with rose petals scattered around him. Investigators noted empty vials of powerful painkillers and torn wedding photos on the bed. Based on the scene, it appeared that Greg had consumed a lethal combination of controlled substances. During questioning, Kristen said she had told her husband about wanting to separate the night before. Just 17 months after their wedding, she said she regretted getting married and felt she had rushed into it. She described Greg as overly clingy and said she wanted distance from him. Gregory's death was officially ruled a suicide caused by strong sedative drugs. Kristen signed the cremation papers. However, Greg's family and friends refused to accept that explanation. None of them had noticed any changes in his behavior or mood. He hadn't shared marital problems with anyone, and those close to him knew he strongly opposed drug use. They believed he would never have taken those substances willingly. The family acted quickly to stop the cremation and demanded an independent autopsy. Their persistence opened the door to a possible homicide investigation. Toxicology tests soon revealed extremely high levels of fentanyl in Gregory's body, a painkiller roughly 150 times stronger than morphine, along with smaller amounts of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone, sometimes referred to as hillbilly heroin. Investigators began to suspect that while Gregory was heavily sedated by clonazepam and other drugs found in his system, someone else may have administered the fatal dose of fentanyl. Kristen quickly became the main suspect. Fentanyl isn't an over-the-counter medication, and she not only had access to it but also the knowledge to use it. When Kristen arrived at the police station for questioning, detectives noted her gaunt appearance and erratic behavior, which suggested ongoing drug use. This suspicion was later confirmed by her own admissions. Her statements about the day Gregory died were also inconsistent. At first, she told paramedics that Gregory hadn't taken any medication at all. Later, she changed her account, saying he might have taken oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory may have overdosed on oxycodone. Oxycodone is an opioid that can relieve pain but also produce a feeling of euphoria. It suppresses breathing, and without quick medical intervention, an overdose can be fatal. Police considered whether Gregory may have died from an accidental overdose involving cold medicine and oxycodone. During conversations with Kristen, they learned that Gregory had been deeply upset about their failing marriage. Kristen suggested to investigators that he may have taken his own life, which became another possible explanation they explored. On November 8th, one of Kristen's co-workers, Russ Lowe, contacted police. He told them about Kristen's affair with her supervisor. That call changed the direction of the investigation. Detectives uncovered evidence linking Kristen to her boss, Dr. Michael Robertson. This included explicit emails between the two, as well as computer files and professional materials that demonstrated Dr. Robertson's specialized knowledge of fentanyl. At that point, the pieces began to fall into place. Investigators believed Gregory may have become a problem for the couple. He knew about Kristen's drug use and her access to controlled substances through the lab, and they suspected Michael had been protecting her. Authorities now believed the crime may have been planned. The challenge was finding proof. During questioning, Michael Robertson admitted that he knew about Kristen's drug dependency. Despite this, no charges were filed against either of them at the time. Both Kristen and Michael were fired from their positions for multiple workplace violations. In January, the investigation took another turn when police searched Kristen's home. They found drug paraphernalia and traces of narcotics. Kristen was arrested for the first time, but was later released on bail. As the investigation continued, new evidence emerged, including Kristen's personal diary. Investigators believed the diary wasn't written as a private journal, but rather with the intention that someone else would read it. They suspected it was meant to support her innocence and reinforce the narrative that Gregory's death was a carefully staged suicide. Investigators also focused on Kristen's actions on the day her husband died. She had purchased a single red rose and revealing lingerie, behavior they found inconsistent with someone in distress. Medical experts determined that Gregory had been unconscious for at least 6 hours before his death and may have died an hour to an hour and a half before being officially pronounced dead. They also discovered a bruise consistent with a needle injection on his arm, with no clear explanation for who caused it or why. At Kristen's workplace, investigators discovered that fentanyl, the drug that caused Gregory's death, along with other controlled substances, was missing. Police concluded that Kristen had poisoned her husband by administering fentanyl without his knowledge. Prosecutors began building their case around toxicological evidence and medical findings. With enough circumstantial evidence in hand, Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail as the case moved toward trial. When proceedings began, the prosecution focused heavily on motive. They argued that Kristen killed Gregory because he threatened to damage her carefully maintained image by exposing her renewed drug use and her affair with Michael Robertson. According to prosecutors, Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl. Jurors heard that fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid, roughly 80 times stronger than morphine. Prosecutors suggested that Kristen first attempted to kill Gregory using clonazepam, and when that failed, she turned to fentanyl. They also argued that she staged the bedroom to make his death look like a suicide by tearing pages from her diary and arranging rose petals and a wedding photo around his body. The court was told that Kristen, who held a degree in biochemistry, used her training and knowledge of drugs to kill her husband. Prosecutors further claimed that she expected her co-workers at the medical examiner's office to accept Gregory's death as a suicide and overlook the presence of fentanyl. However, before Gregory's autopsy could take place, Kristen was transferred to another laboratory, and any attempt to influence toxicology results failed. Prosecutors then laid out a detailed timeline of Kristen's movements on November 6. Early that morning, she called Gregory's employer to report that he wouldn't be coming to work, then went to her own job. Co-workers testified that about an hour after she arrived, around 9 a.m., she was seen crying inside Michael Robertson's office. The apartment manager later reported seeing Kristen return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she went to a local grocery store and bought several items, including a single red rose. Credit card records confirmed the purchase. In the hours before Gregory's death, she also made multiple phone calls to Michael. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been dead for at least 1 hour before paramedics arrived. He explained to the court that Gregory had developed early bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when secretions normally cleared through breathing begin to pool in the lungs. This happens when a person is unconscious or breathing too shallowly for an extended period of time. Dr. Blackburn also testified that Gregory's bladder contained a large volume of urine, something that would have been extremely uncomfortable had he been conscious. Based on these findings, Dr. Blackburn concluded that Gregory had been breathing poorly for approximately 6 to 12 hours before his death. He emphasized that someone in an unconscious state would not have been capable of sprinkling rose petals around themselves. Dr. Blackburn further testified that the level of clonazepam found in Gregory's blood was not high enough to be lethal. Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, explained that fentanyl is an extremely powerful and fast-acting painkiller with a dangerous side effect, respiratory arrest. Dr. Stanley testified that the speed at which fentanyl takes effect depends on how it is administered. A transdermal patch reaches peak levels after about 16 hours. Oral ingestion peaks within 20 to 30 minutes. Intramuscular injection takes effect in 15 to 20 minutes, while intravenous injection can act within 5 minutes. He explained that fentanyl is rarely taken orally because the liver destroys roughly 65% of the drug, allowing only 35% to reach the bloodstream. When asked how fentanyl entered Gregory's body, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could offer a definitive answer. However, Dr. Stanley testified that the varying concentrations of fentanyl found in Gregory's system, combined with evidence showing he was unconscious and breathing shallowly for several hours, suggested that fentanyl was likely administered multiple times. Although prosecutors could not state with certainty how Kristen poisoned Gregory, they theorized that fentanyl patches may have been applied to his arm while he was asleep. This theory was supported by the unexplained disappearance of 15 fentanyl patches from the laboratory where Kristen had previously worked. The defense maintained Kristen's innocence. They acknowledged that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but claimed he had administered the drug himself in an intentional act driven by despair over personal and family issues. Kristen took the stand in her own defense. She testified that on the morning of November 6th, she woke up to find Gregory emotionally distressed. At 7:42 a.m., she called his employer to report that he was ill and would not be coming to work. Kristen testified that she went to work but returned home later to check on Gregory and have lunch with him. She told the court, "I asked Gregory why he was so upset that morning. He said he wasn't feeling well and had taken oxycodone and clonazepam. He planned to stay home and sleep. I left again around 2:30 in the afternoon. During my lunch break, I came home and we ate together. I went back to work. When I returned around 8 that evening, Gregory was lying on the bed. I thought he was asleep. I took a bath. When I came out, I tried to wake him, and he was cold. That's when I called emergency services." During cross-examination, the prosecutor challenged her account, calling it implausible. Kristen admitted she had lied in the past and acknowledged her drug use. The prosecutor argued that fentanyl was the perfect murder weapon, powerful, fast-acting, and difficult to detect, and emphasized that Kristen understood this better than most because of her profession. Medical testimony contradicted Kristen's account. Autopsy and toxicology findings showed that Gregory had been unconscious for 6 to 8 hours before his death, making it impossible for him to have eaten lunch with her that day. The defense argued that while clonazepam alone was not lethal, combining it with oxycodone could create a dangerous synergistic effect. They suggested Gregory may have unknowingly taken the drugs himself. How fentanyl entered Gregory's system and why it was present in such high concentrations remained unresolved. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and special circumstances murder due to the use of poison. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kristen continued to maintain her innocence and appealed the verdict. During appellate proceedings, her attorneys admitted mistakes were made by the defense team. They had accepted that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but failed to test the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. Such testing could have shown whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or whether the drug entered the samples through contamination after his death. The appellate court heard testimony about a break in the chain of custody. The autopsy samples were placed in an unsealed cardboard box and left at the medical examiner's office for approximately 36 hours before being transferred to the sheriff's forensic lab. During that time, anyone with access to the building could have tampered with the samples. Kristen argued that there were personal conflicts and strained relationships within the office that created motive for evidence manipulation. She also pointed out that on November 8, 2000, Michael Robertson told a toxicologist that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. A 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Kristen's attorneys were ineffective for failing to challenge the fentanyl overdose theory and for not testing for metabolites. However, the court did not overturn her conviction. Instead, the case was sent back to federal court to determine whether the defense error could have changed the outcome. Before a hearing could take place, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that federal courts must defer to state court decisions in cases like this. As a result, the appellate court declined to hold a hearing. Kristen's appeal was denied, and her conviction stood. Michael Robertson was named as an uncharged accomplice during Kristen's trial. Authorities quietly filed a sealed criminal conspiracy complaint and issued a warrant for his arrest. Robertson, who has lived and worked freely as a forensic toxicology consultant in Australia since Gregory's death, would face arrest and a $100,000 bail if he ever returned to the United States. Gregory's family later filed a civil lawsuit against the county, accusing it of negligence that allowed Kristen to steal lethal drugs from the medical examiner's office. In 2006, a U.S. court awarded the family $147 million in damages, a verdict that once again captured national attention. Kristen Rossum, a former toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, remains incarcerated. In February 2003, she was sentenced to life without parole for stealing drugs from the lab, poisoning her husband, Gregory DeVillers, and staging his death to appear as a suicide, complete with scattered red rose petals. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to follow more stories like this, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Your support helps us continue creating the content we care about sharing with you.